Do you want to do take 3 or...
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you took us off. Okay, let's do this again.
Okay.
Hi, Richie.
I sinned for the first time.
Tell us what's happening today.
Well, as we've not discussed before, this is a Patreon-sponsored episode. It is the first one we've ever done.
It's sponsored by the wonderful Rachel.
And she has asked us to play the game Killer 7, released in 2005 for the PS2 and GameCube.
Thank you, Richie.
So, had you had much experience with Killer 7 or Suda51 before this episode?
No, I've never heard of Killer 7. And I'm still not sure what Suda51 is.
Suda51 is a guy.
Which guy?
Suda51, he's a person.
Yeah, which person is he?
He's the designer and the writer of Killer 7.
That doesn't sound like a name. Is his first name Pseudo, last name 51?
Oh god, I'll look up what his actual name is.
Thank you.
Okay. His name is Goichi Suda, but he goes by Suda51.
Goichi
Suda.
Isn't that 51?
It might. Yeah, it is. There we go.
Oh my god, I'm a brilliant what's a person that's brilliant with languages?
Linguist?
Yeah. Not only do I predict the future, I know all languages of the world.
Excellent.
Thank you.
So, I remember
I
when
think you should explain to people why I may be a little unattentive and off track today.
Sin has a hangover. And what better game to discuss the story of while hungover than Killer 7?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I knew what Killer 7 was, and I knew who Suda51 was, but I had not played it. It came out in 2005 when I wasn't really playing games at all, because it was after I'd graduated high school, but before I had any kind of income. So, I remember when it came out, and I remember my friends at the time being very into it. And I hadn't played it, even though it had been available, like, recently. I hadn't played it, because my friends at the time did a pretty bad job of selling me on it.
What did they say?
Well, because it was 2005 when, like, monkey cheese randomness was kind of the order of the day on the internet. And they kept sending me, like, random shots of it and basically saying, "It's so random!" And trying to get me to think it was, like... It wasn't really about anything, it was just a series of non sequiturs. And that didn't really interest me, but having actually played it now, I appreciated it a lot, yeah.
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 So, how do we even start talking about this game?
Well, we could start with, like, an explanation of the premise. I think that's probably the place to start. The premise of the story.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
wait.
You are hungover.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if I'm hungover. I don't know. I just feel like maybe there's still alcohol in my system. And maybe it's impacting my cognitive functions.
Right.
Yeah. But it's okay. I'm eating a McDonald's breakfast as well as McDonald's chai and coffee.
Are we sponsored by McDonald's now? Are you something you're not telling me?
Can you imagine? Sorry, I had to find out this way.
Okay, so the plot of Killer 7, we'll go over, like, the backstory, I guess, up to the first mission.
Yeah.
Okay, so this game came out in 2005. And it is set in 2005, but it's very clearly, like, an alternate 2005. It's sort of like 2005 as envisaged by someone in like 1990. It's sort of like futuristic, has an alternate history to it. Yeah. So in the world of Killer 7, in 1998, all the world's nuclear missiles were disarmed, and basically world peace was created. But terrorism remained a threat. So to counter terrorism, the governments of the world banned all air travel, and they banned the internet as basically a counter-terrorist measure.
But instead of air travel, they put in something.
Yeah, these huge transcontinental expressways. Like the continents are just bridged with actual physical bridges. Despite this, a terrorist group called Heaven Smile, or Smiling Faces, depending on who is talking about them, ends up appearing. The Heaven Smile group are people whose bodies are physically altered and transformed into these strange, sort of demonic living bombs. And they're overseen by a man called Kunlan. Now, because this, even though this is like an alternate present/past, it still draws on things that happen in the real world. So, in real life, in 1960, there was a peace treaty between the US and Japan. This idea of it's like mutual defense. The US and Japan are sort of mutually like in this together. They're defending each other. So that really did happen. And then the way that articulates in the world of Killer 7 is that there's two political parties in Japan. Confusingly, one is called the UN Party, but they're not actually the UN. And this really confused me when I was playing it, because I thought, are they talking about the United Nations?
Yeah, me too.
There's the UN Party and the Liberal Party. So the Liberal Party want to stay with the United States and stay as part of this peace treaty, but the UN Party wants to... They want Japanese independence from the US, and what they're kind of clandestinely plotting to do is, once they have independence from the US, they will attempt to take over the world and have Japan dominate the world. And the kind of MacGuffin that's driving most of the plot is something called the Yacumo policy. Yeah, which is
the policy.
The policy. It is a document that we never actually see it, but the idea is it's this document that it explains how to govern a perfect country, how to like create a utopia, how to control everything. And that is the source of the UN Party's power, but it was originally drafted by members of the Liberal Party. The UN Party stole it from the Liberal Party. So a lot of the game is this kind of back and forth as different factions squabble over who has control of the Yacumo. So the story begins with the assassin group called the Killer 7, who are hired by the US government to deal with the Heaven Smiles, and they get drawn into the whole Yacumo situation.
Yeah. Wow, you explained it so good. It's really, really impressive. I'm giving you an honest compliment, Richie.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So, do you want to go into what the Killer 7 actually are?
Yeah.
So, the thing about the Killer 7 is that we're given... This game does this constantly. You'll be given one explanation for something, and then later on you get a different one. So, the exact nature of the Killer 7 does change throughout the game, so we'll just go with what you're given at the start right now. Okay. So the idea behind the Killer 7 is that there is an old man called Harmon Smith, who has... It's called multifoliate persona something or other. The idea is it's like a multiple personality disorder, but it's merged with this sort of like psychic powers thing. So he has multiple personalities, but also he's able to physically turn into that person.
Yeah.
So Harmon Smith has inside of him these 7 assassins called the Killer 7. And what he's able to do is he is like a one-man army. He can switch between these 7 different people at will.
Yeah.
And he kind of interfaces through the world with one of them who is called Yeltsin Smith, who is the guy you see in most of the cutscenes. But
he's like sort of the... Not like, I guess, the I guess I want to say almost the leader of.
Well, that
the game?
it gets more complicated as it goes on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the idea is Killer 7, it's Harmon, but he is switching between these different personalities.
Yeah.
They all have different abilities and they all have a different weapon, and that the idea is that, like, the function of that in the gameplay is basically you're just switching between these 7 different characters to make different progress, to solve puzzles because some of them have different abilities, and to deal with different kinds of enemy because some enemies are stronger or weaker to different members of the Killer 7. Along with that, Harmon, aside from the Killer 7 personalities, he has contact with these things called Remnant psyches.
Right, yeah.
Which are people that he or members of the Killer 7 have killed, sort of linger around him as ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
So throughout the game, you will run into characters who are dead, and they keep people that Harmon or the Killer 7 have killed, and they return as sort of NPCs that will give you dialogue, help explain puzzles to you. The most prominent one is a guy called Travis, who was the first victim of the Killer 7. He basically just provides you with gameplay tips. Then you've got, there's Susie, who is a severed head, who gives you items.
Yeah, you know the thing about Susie, though, because all of the other NPCs that are like the spirit-like things or whatever, they're sort of transparent.
Yeah.
But her head isn't.
Yeah.
I thought you could explain to me why that is.
I have no idea. There's also a character called...
I thought you would try harder.
There's also a character called, is it Yun Hyun? Who he specifically provides puzzle solutions for you. And then there's a trio of characters who are bound in these, it's like this bondage gear called Iwazaru, Kikazaru, and Mizaru.
Mm-hmm.
The most prominent of those is Iwazaru, who appears and basically just explains what's coming up in the next area. Kikazaru is a character who exists to show you where... to progress, you need items called soul shells. Kikazaru will point you to where the soul shells are. And Mizaru is not in it very much, but she basically just opens doors. And then throughout the game, as you defeat bosses, they will appear to you as Remnant psyches as well. Some of them in the state they were when you killed them, some of them as their original selves. So toward the end of the game, you end up with just these sort of Remnant psyches everywhere. Thing about Remnant psyches is that when you encounter a living person, they will speak to you normally as a normal video game character would, with like fully voiced dialogue. If you encounter them as a Remnant psyche, they no longer speak. Really, it almost sounds like the backwards talking from Twin Peaks or something. It's like this sort of cut up weird, similar to like Star Fox or Animal Crossing, where it's like a couple of syllables sort of looped over and it's like that, with subtitles.
Yeah, my boyfriend was a little disturbed when I was playing.
Yeah.
Like, what the F is that?
Yeah, and I'm still not sure if it is what I'm saying, where it's just like random syllables, or it is those words. Because if you look at the subtitles, they do seem... you can pick up individual words and names and things as they're speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it is those words, just, I guess, passed through a filter.
It's like a filter, or it's like... It may be spoken backwards or something like that. It's very, very unnerving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, to give a rundown of who the Killer 7 are, they're numbered. So, there's Garcian.
Mm-hmm.
Garcian is... he's both the most useless and the most useful, because his weapon is not very good. He cannot ever level up. He can't ever upgrade it. The others you can upgrade, but Garcian can never be upgraded. His sole ability is that he can bring people back to life.
Yeah.
So, in a manner that like people will recognize from the Souls games if they haven't played this before, if you die on a certain spot, your like corpse will remain there. It looks like a bag.
It looks like a you know when you go to a restaurant and you ask for like a doggy bag or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, a strange
That's what
sort
it
of
looks
bag
like.
that's like, it's like quivers sort of, is left there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then rather than that being counted as a death, you then take control of Garcian. And Garcian has to go from the last place you saved to where you died. And if he can make it there without dying, that character is brought back and you just sort of start over. But if he dies on the way there, it is actually game over.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then there's Dan, who is just like the all.
Yeah.
Dan is the all-rounder. He is a guy with a revolver. He is the one I use the most. I think you could probably get through like 90% of the game just using Dan. The others are extremely situational, but Dan is good for most of it, I think. And we'll come to this later on. There's Kaide. She's a woman who has a gun that fires very slowly, but it has a ranged sight on it. The idea is that as you're fighting enemies, some of them have weak points. If you have Kaide, you can very accurately aim at the weak points to hit them.
Yeah.
Kevin, he can go invisible. I never used Kevin outside of the parts where you had to go invisible. I don't think he's very useful.
I used him.
Yeah?
I like him. He's cool. He like throws knives. He's totally melee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is he that useful though?
I don't know. I just like him.
Okay. The advantage of Kevin is that Kevin doesn't have a gun, he throws knives. And because he throws knives, he never has to reload.
Yeah.
Yeah, he never has to reload.
Yeah. That was cool.
Yeah. Coyote Smith, who is basically a worse version of Dan, but he has the ability to jump very high, but only sometimes. Which I think is a good description of some of the puzzles in this, and I'm using puzzles in quotation marks. Yeah. Con, who has 2 automatic pistols. He's the only character who has automatic weapons, so he is very useful against some targets where you have to concentrate fire on a certain point, so he will fire like very, very rapidly. But he'll hit them over and over again, not for much damage, but there are times when you want volume of fire over actual damage. He's 14. He's very, very small. And there are parts of the game where there's just holes and things that only Con can go into. And finally, there is Mask, who his weapon is a grenade launcher. And he is a professional wrestler.
Yeah, he's pretty funny.
Yeah. Mask his grenade launcher is extremely strong, but because of the way the game kind of figures out damage, which we'll get to later on, he can destroy most enemies, but when he does it, you won't get as much of a benefit, basically because of how the gun works. And also, because he is a professional wrestler, there are some just objects and things that he will be able to crack or move because he's very, very strong. Yeah.
There's also a young Herman option.
We'll get to that later on when we start talking about Harmon and the various Harmon incarnations.
Okay.
Okay. So Killer 7 is broken into 6. Well, no, it's technically broken into 7 different missions. Okay. So the idea is that the Killer 7 are given, it's 7 different missions. They technically go up to 6, but it counts 0 as one of them. So there's 7, even though it says 6. Where they're just sent to assassinate someone and get embroiled in the weird shit that is going on there. So before we get to those, do you want to talk about the way the game controls? Because it's extremely strange.
Yeah, the tutorial was really, really weird. Where you basically, how do you describe that? You push a button to run, and then you can change directions with the stick, but you don't really have much control over where you're going.
Killer 7 is a weird hybrid of like Resident Evil and Virtua Cop. Because you're in an environment where you can go in different directions, you can go in all these different rooms and things, but you are tied to a rail. Like in a rail shooter. You are stuck on one rail, you can only go forwards or backwards. So what happens is you have one button that makes you run down the rail. And then you will continue down the rail until you either hit a junction or you you ready your weapon. Once you ready your weapon, the perspective changes to what is essentially like a light gun game, but controlled with a joystick. So you can't see the character, you just see this target reticle appear on the screen. You move that around and then you fire with one of the buttons on the controller. So it's like playing Virtua Cop. And that is how you deal with the enemies in the game. The enemies in the game are called Heaven Smiles. The gimmick with them is that when they initially appear, they are either completely invisible or you can just kind of make out their outline as they move. The way that you kind of tell if a Heaven Smile is around is that you can hear them laughing. So you should play this game with the sound up, because otherwise you will keep running around into corners and just like bashing into them, basically. The only way that Heaven Smiles can attack you is by walking into you.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as a Heaven Smile is identified, or so basically as soon as a Heaven Smile spawns, it's just going to walk toward you. And they have slightly different ways of getting toward you. Like there are some that move along ceilings. There are some that move extremely quickly. There are some that they stay stationary, but they sort of like roll eggs at you. And if you shoot the egg becomes another smile.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really the only means of attack, and they just sort of play with that in different ways. Like there's different sized ones. There's some that like the more parts you shoot off them, the faster they get. Later on, there's a variant that you have to you can't actually hurt it from the front at all. You have to shoot it one of its arms until the force of that makes it spin, and then you can shoot it in the back. And when you kill a Heaven Smile, you get two kinds of blood from them, which are called thin blood and thick blood. If you hit them in their weak point, they get sort of a unique death animation where they turn into a red sort of silhouette and explode in this huge shower of blood. And that gives you like significantly more thin and thick blood than you would otherwise get. So, and that also counts as like an instant death thing if you can snipe them on their weak point.
Yeah.
This is what I was saying about Mask, is that because of the way Mask's gun works, his gun is, I think it's the only one that has an actual blast radius when it hits. So even if you're off slightly, the blast will still hit the smile. Because of the way that gun works, you can't use it to snipe with. So even though it's an extremely reliable way of killing smiles, you won't get much of a benefit from doing it. So you actually want to stick with usually Dan or Kaide to snipe with. So they give you thin blood and thick blood. Thin blood is kept by the character. You can carry up to 20 sets of thin blood. Thin blood is used to either heal yourself or it powers character special abilities. So you can go into the menu, you can use a vial of thin blood to restore your health. Or, for example, Dan gets an ability called... It's like a charged shot he can do. And you can charge it up to 3 levels, but every level you charge it uses up another vial of thin blood. Kevin, when he goes invisible, he drains thin blood while he's invisible. Coyote and Mask's changes they can make to the environment are also powered by thin blood. So it's pretty easy to come by, and it's mostly used for healing, I guess, and charging shots. So you have a pretty steady churn of thin blood throughout the game, because as you're killing stuff, you're constantly getting more thin blood. The thick blood is basically experience points. So what happens is that as you collect thick blood, when you go to the save rooms, you can transform the thick blood into what the game just calls serum. And you then use the serum to upgrade character skills. And there is a limited amount of serum you can get per mission. If you grind for thick blood, eventually the machine that makes the serum stops working. And it actually gets a little out of order sign on it. So you can't just hang around and level everyone up, like on one spot. You have to actually progress. There's also a mechanic where you can trade thick blood with Yun Hyun to get hints on the puzzles, but the puzzles in the game are I don't even know what to call them, but I never felt the need to get hints for them. An example of what I mean by the puzzles in the game are they're extremely, I would say, streamlined. But they're streamlined to the point where they kind of don't really feel like puzzles to me. Like a good example of the puzzles in Killer 7 is there is an area in this second mission that you do where there's just like there's a photograph of a series of horses finishing a race, and they all just have the number that they finished in. And then
yeah.
Yeah, and then in an immediately adjacent room, there's a series of horses with numbers on them, and you just have to line them up based on that. It's like extremely simplistic.
Yeah.
They barely register as puzzles. Or another one is like you will just see like a character will say like the password is written on my shirt, and then you just write down what's on the shirt and then enter it in a terminal, and then like that's the puzzle. There's not a huge amount of like engagement. None of it really felt like a puzzle at all, honestly. The other thing is that you get Resident Evil style emblems that you have to insert into things to make them work.
Right, yeah.
But one thing that this does to further streamline it is that like you don't really have an inventory screen per se, you just have them with you. So if you have the emblem and then you interact with the thing that needs the emblem, it just automatically goes in. You don't have to actually like open the menu, find the emblem, and use it. It's just an automatic, like, okay, you have the thing, you can go past it. So there's an emphasis on things being quite fast, which really works well with the rail controls, because you are just sort of like running back and forth. There's a good sort of momentum to it. But I feel like there's some missions later on where that stops working and they become quite tedious. There is an awful lot of back and forth, but we'll get to that later on. Another thing it's worth mentioning is that there is no way to mash through text. If someone is talking to you, you cannot press confirm to skip to the next line. You have to either watch the whole conversation play out at its own pace or skip it entirely. And that started getting on my nerves when like I would need a clue for a puzzle and I would just need to check one thing, but I'd have to sit through the whole conversation with like Ikazaru to figure something out when I really just wanted to know one thing. And because like you can tell that Suda51 really likes these characters, a lot of the dialogue is kind of overwritten and they all have catchphrases and things. So you'll want to get to one little piece of info, but you'll have to sit through like a little story they're telling first. And it was sort of odd that they did that in a game that was very heavily leaning into everything being really fast. It ultimately developed a sort of lurching pace for me where it would be very fast and then suddenly I would be stuck and there would just be lots and lots of backtracking and confusion.
Yeah, I'm still confused about the game to this day.
Okay. Do you want to go over the various missions then? The 7 missions. Okay. So it starts
Let
with
me
you.
open the wiki because I don't remember.
All right. Okay.
It's good.
Okay.
It's a good day.
Do you think it would make more sense if you weren't hungover, or would it still be comprehensible?
I think it would still be like.
Yeah. Okay. So I feel like the story itself, as in what everyone did and why they did it, is not that confusing.
Really?
Yeah, I think what makes it confusing is that the world is filled with little peripheral details that are never explained or elaborated on.
Oh, Richie.
Yeah.
I should have probably confessed to you a couple of days ago. I've been wanting to, but I'm like, ugh, it might make Richard a little discouraged.
Okay, so you'll bring this up as we're recording.
Yeah. So, I think part of why I find this whole game confusing is because
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes movies or games have like a political plot going on or whatever.
Yeah, yeah,
Kind of like in this game or whatever.
yep.
So, so whenever something has a political plot, I sort of tune out.
Mm.
So, are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I think I was just like tuned out for most of the game,
Yeah,
and it impacted my understanding of it
good.
in terms of the actual plot and the peripherals of the plot.
That's good.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I feel like the actual plot, as in like who is doing what and for what reason, that is as complicated as like a standard spy thriller. Like, characters have multiple identities, they change allegiances, people are being manipulated, people are being lied to. That's all like standard.
Yeah, I standardly tune out at those two.
Yeah, yeah. It's I think a lot of the confusion and the way that the game is viewed as like incomprehensible. It comes from the way that it leans very heavily into just straight up magic shit. Like we were talking earlier, there is a character who can become 7 other people. And
Yeah.
it is explained in like one line, like this is just what he does. And there is like there are characters who are immortal, there are characters who, like at one point there is a Sentai team that just sort of show up. It is like, but once you sort of accept, and like clearly the whole plot is driven by this thing called the Yacumo, that's like a book that if you possess it gives you like unlimited power. But like once you just accept that those things are part of the world, the what everyone is doing, I think, is pretty like straightforward for a spy story.
Uh-huh.
The other thing is that there's a lot of peripheral world building that is alluded to and then doesn't get explained at all. And while I was looking into this, it turns out there is a book called A Hand in Killer 7 that is like a guide to the Killer 7 world that elaborates on all this stuff.
Mhm.
So it feels like a lot of this, it doesn't make sense because it was like just it was going it does actually fit together, but just a lot of it is missing.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think a lot of that stuff is not really part of the plot. It's sort of part of the world building that's going on. Like there is a character who appears in like one scene and has no dialogue, who it turns out is very important, but you just sort of like let it slide. You can follow what else is happening. It's things like that. Like individual characters and names are sort of, they crop up once, you don't see them again. It seems confusing, but they tend not to be integral to the plot.
Yeah, basically this is worse than Bloodborne.
Yeah. Actually, it made me long for the concise and straightforward storytelling of Hidetaka Miyazaki. So the first
Alright.
mission,
Yeah.
you are sent to kill off the Heaven Smiles who are in a skyscraper. The target is this character called Kunlan, who will become more important later on. That was the first. That's basically the tutorial area. It's literally called Zero. Like it sort of almost doesn't count as part of the game. Uh, do you have any comments on that area?
I don't know. All areas are confusing and hard to navigate.
Were they hard to navigate since you're stuck to a rail?
Well, I mean, hard to navigate in a sense, where it's like, where am I going to go now? Have I been here before? I don't remember.
Yeah. See, I didn't mind that because the fact that you were tied to a rail, like, and it did severely limit the number of things you could do, made it progress a lot faster than like something like Resident Evil, which it is possible to get hopelessly lost in that game and not understand that, like, oh, I need to go to this very specific room with this specific item to make this thing happen. In Killer 7, there is literally just a line that you run down.
Go on.
Well, because you're stuck to a line, you know that every junction is relevant. Like, there's not going to be a space I don't need to go to. If there's a line facing somewhere, it means it's important.
I don't know, I still found it confusing. Still missed areas. Maybe if the line, like, led you where you're supposed to go. Like, if your character walked on its own, you know?
Well, that's how, like, Virtua Cop works, where you're on a rail and the game is moving by itself and you are just shooting.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why I was saying it felt like a combination of, like, it's like an exploration-focused Virtua Cop, where you are tied to a rail, and when you go into gun mode, it does look like Virtua Cop. You are just shooting, like, stuff appearing on the screen. You're trying to hit weak points. But because they were going for a more, like, console experience as opposed to arcade experience, they let you go backwards and forwards along the line to sort of backtrack and take alternate paths.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. So, at the top of the skyscraper, this is the introductory mission. You encounter this strange, it's just a straight up angel that,
Yeah, like an anime angel.
yeah, she's very, very anime looking, and this happens later on as well, that there's, like, characters who just wear anime masks as opposed to having a human head. The angel is revealed to just be like, not an actual person, just a puppet controlled by Kunlan. So at the very top of the skyscraper, you confront Kunlan, and oh, okay. So security cameras.
Oh, yeah.
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 One of the things the game does, and this is not, like, it's not explained, they just basically for story progression reasons, is that sometimes you'll walk into a room and then it will show a security camera looking at you, and then it will cut to the camera's point of view, and you will see your character glitch out and be replaced by someone else. So
Yeah.
it kind of locks you into certain characters for certain points. And it doesn't, there's no explanation for it. It's just, this is what has to happen for the story to progress.
Oh, I think here is where it was revealed who Harmon is, right?
Yeah, yeah. So you get to the top of the skyscraper, regardless of which Killer 7 you are, at the top of the skyscraper, you are forced to play as Harmon. And you have never played as Harmon before. You can't actually select Harmon as a character outside of very specific circumstances. So you're stuck playing as Harmon, and there's you encounter Kunlan.
Wait, we must talk about Harmon, Richie.
Okay.
Yeah, when it happens, you're like, you're Harmon? And Harmon, what does he look like, Richie?
Harmon looks like Gurman.
Yes! Literally! And the name sounds like Gurman a little too. Like
Yeah.
Harmon, Gurman. Yeah. He has like a head, a wheelchair, and everything.
Did Gurman have
Well, instead of a scythe, he has
a rocket launcher?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is the scythe equivalent of 2005.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. So Harmon encounters Kunlan, and this is one of the quote-unquote boss fights that is not really a boss fight, it's scripted. You have a degree of control, but there's one way it can play out, and there's no way to lose. So Harmon and Kunlan encounter each other, and they have this sort of deliberately obfuscated conversation. They have an intentionally very kind of vague conversation that alludes to, like, they have been in conflict for the last 30 years. And they talk about how, like, they used to play chess together, and they're sort of always in check, and Harmon has won up until now. Harmon then launches a shell from his rocket launcher at Kunlan. Kunlan reveals that he has a magic hand that has this sort of, he holds his hand up, it's surrounded by this strange sparkling aura, and he catches the shell that Harmon shot at him. That blows Kunlan out the window, and he just lands on another building.
Yeah.
And basically says, like, it's happening again. And that's kind of the prologue. So throughout the game, you will repeatedly encounter Kunlan and Harmon trapped in these sort of, like, the idea is this is an eternal struggle. Harmon and Kunlan have been fighting each other for however many hundreds of years, and they're these, like, immortal creatures. Yeah, this is revealed later on. I think we'll get to it then. But yeah, the idea is that like you will repeatedly encounter Harmon and Kunlan engaged in these strange sort of stalemates where one is trying to get advantage over the other. So it's the first hint that like not only is this full of like a guy who can change his body into 7 different people and like ghosts and shit, but there's also this kind of cosmic struggle being played out in what's going on. Okay, so then we get the first, I guess, mission proper, which is set at a restaurant, primarily. At the beginning, you are sent, you discover that the head of the Japanese UN party has been assassinated because the Liberal Party want control of the Yacumo policy. So this plays out in a restaurant. And what did you think of this mission?
It was confusing.
Good.
Everything was confusing, Richard.
Yeah.
But at least in here, I think they explained the world setting, right?
Yeah, the sort of synopsis that we gave at the start is given to you throughout the game, in sort of drips and drops. There's a prologue at the beginning that explains some stuff, but the whole situation with the different feuding Japanese parties and the Yakumo is something that you discover piece by piece as you go onward. Sometimes, actually, a lot of it is through Travis.
Yeah.
Travis appears throughout the game. He has a shirt on that always has something slightly different written on it when you see him. And it's just a series of strange things like sexual or like like hustle or it's very cute.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this mission is I did get kind of lost at this point because this is the first mission that makes you select a specific character, and I didn't realize I had to do it. So, in order to progress in this mission, you need to get an item from the roof, but you have no means of getting to the roof. So, what the game wants you to do is switch to Coyote Smith because he can jump up there. And this is sort of. This happens an awful lot at the I'd say like the first half to 2/3 of the game. At least from my experience, I was almost exclusively using Dan for everything because he was the most versatile. Then I would just come to parts where it would say, okay, I need to be this guy now. So I would play as Dan, hit a point, switch to Coyote for like 2 seconds, do the thing, switch back to Dan. And I started to think at this point, like, is it even necessary for there to be these 7 guys? Because it's just getting sort of like tedious having to. I've got this one guy who can pretty much do everything, but then arbitrarily I have to switch to Coyote or switch to Mask or something to perform like some basic sort of puzzle thing that's not really a puzzle. A lot of them were preceded by like, when I say it's not really a puzzle, you will find like a pile of rubble, and next to it, Travis will be standing there, and he will say like, "Well, this looks pretty heavy. I guess a pro wrestler could move it." So you just switch to Mask, and then an automated Mask moves the rubble. Not a puzzle in any meaningful sense, I don't think, but it does that a lot, and I started to, I guess, kind of get frustrated with the fact that it was doing this. I started wondering why are there even 7 characters in this? Because it's really just one character called Dan, who then sometimes has to go into a menu to open doors. This isn't. I don't think this holds up though, because the more I played into it, the more of Killer 7 I played, the more the other persona became useful. So it's just really this part of the game that was starting to sort of make me go. You encounter another thing that it does is by putting those like very arbitrary roadblocks in it where you need one character to do something, it can force encounters where you are one specific character. So in the example I used there's a part that only Mask can go through. And because of that, it's able to make it so that there's a specific cutscene that plays out between Mask and another character. This character is the chef at the restaurant where you are trying to track down like what happened to the Yacumo and this assassin and everything. And he comes back later on. So what happens is you find that the UN party's head who was assassinated by his secretary, who was actually an agent for the Liberal Party. And then you have the boss fight with her. And pretty much all the boss fights in this game are... Actually, I think they really could all just be described as a weird gimmick fight. Like, there's no sort of traditional boss fights, as you would... There are some that seem to be traditional boss fights initially, but if you play them that way, you will lose. There's always some sort of gimmick, and a lot of them can be done extremely quickly once you figure out what to do. So the fight with the boss of this area is a fight with the assassin who killed the head of the UN party. It plays out as literally who can shoot the most bullets as fast as possible. So there's no health bars, you're just hammering fire as quickly as you can. And then there's a timer at the top of the screen. When the timer gets to 0, whoever fired the most bullets wins. So it depends on the character you pick, obviously. They all have different firing rates. If you pick Mask, I don't think it's actually possible to win because his grenade launcher is so slow. If you pick Con, you would presumably do it extremely quickly. I did it fine with Dan just by hammering R1. Just by hammering X, sorry. Just by hammering X, I was able to... Yeah. I just hammered X, I won by like 3 shots, it was fine. So you then discover that the chef who had the encounter with Mask is also a double agent. He is a spy, and you have to track him down. So this is still technically the same like mission, but it shifts location drastically. So then the second half of it is in another, it's like a skyscraper building again. No, actually, the second half is in like the head of the UN party headquarters. And while you're there, you realize that Kunlan is manipulating the sort of feud between the Liberal and UN parties. This plays out, I found, very, very similarly to the first mission, in that you're just sort of going up and down a building. Actually, there was an excellent puzzle here that, again, it's an example of like the puzzle design in this game is just... I don't know if the puzzle design in this game is like a postmodern commentary on puzzle design, or it's just really bad. But like, what happens is at the very beginning of this mission, you're next to a car, and the car just has letters written on the windscreen. And then about like 10 seconds walk from the car is a vending machine with those letters on it. And you just press those letters and it opens. And that's the puzzle? Like, it's the sort of puzzle you would find in like a Flash-based like escape the room game on Newgrounds. It's so like it's there's no attempt at it being realistic, but it's also not challenging at all. And I'm just stuck wondering, like, because Suda51 is known for being like, he's this sort of... The game does this constantly. It's like constantly breaking the fourth wall. It's very meta and self-aware. Is this supposed to be a joke about how arbitrary and stupid puzzles in this sort of game are? Or is it just arbitrary and stupid? And I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, but it also just comes across as like, I don't know why this has to be, because it's not like it's like subverting it or anything. It's not like you would be given a solution to a stupid puzzle, but then it's the wrong solution or something that would actually like subvert the concept. It is just a series of very bad puzzles.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this leads to an encounter with the heads of the UN party. And this is a boss fight that I really, really didn't like much. It's a gimmick boss like the last one. The idea is that the first phase, there's these two politicians. They have shot themselves in the head and come back as zombies, essentially. So
Yeah.
the backs of their heads are hanging open and their brains are exposed. So, and they, because it's stuck to a rail, like, you can't go near them. You're just off to one side. It's almost like Space Invaders. Like, you are down the bottom and they are at the top and they're throwing things at you. So what happened was, I realized that in order to get the first one down, you had to shoot one of their ties, and it would blow over his neck. And when that happened, the other one would turn to put the tie back down. And that was the cue to shoot him in the back of the head, because his brain would be exposed. So that was fine. I thought, oh, that's cute. That's like a funny sort of boss fight kind of gimmick. Like, you kill a guy by messing up his tie. Then the second one, it wasn't that. It was that as he was about to attack you, he lowers his head very, very briefly. It's like a window of, like, I'd say a single digit's worth of frames, where his head is there. And you have to shoot him when he does that. But the hitbox is so small and so precise that it took me seriously like 20 minutes to get out of the second phase, because I could not hit that thing. Even though I'm Kaide, I'm zooming in, I have like the sight right over it. It's just so quick and the shots are so imprecise that it just took forever. And like my hand was quite badly cramped by the end of it. It actually hurt because I was having to do constant precision aiming with an analog stick, which is not ideal.
Aw.
Yeah, yeah. And the long and short of it is that at the end of this chapter, because of rising tensions between Japan and the US and this feuding over the who's in control of Japan, the US ends up blowing up Japan. It sends a fleet of missiles toward Japan and it's just wiped off the map.
Yeah, that was weird. I
Yeah.
didn't expect that.
Yeah. Yeah. Japan is completely wiped out at the end of this mission, and it's just gone from that point onward. But Japan is gone, but because it is like kind of about Japanese identity, Japanese characters stay in there, and like the surviving Japanese population continue to play a major role. So even though there is no Japan, the Liberal Party and the UN Party and the Yacumo are still driving the plot. So this is the third mission is, it seems to be everyone's favorite that I've spoken to, because it centers around this extremely over the top personality called Almeida.
Yeah.
Almeida is a fucking weirdo with a gigantic afro who wears a t-shirt with Texas Bronco written on it.
Yeah.
And he is a postal worker who somehow came into possession of like a part of the Yakumo. Not the whole thing, just a part of it. And even though it's not the full thing, that's granted him like the ability to create this nation, this sort of paradise on Earth, which he calls Almeida Land. So he goes from being a postal worker to being this kind of weird, like, cult leader. And he has a city in the middle of Texas called Almeida Land. And he becomes worried that because he has part of the Yakumo, he is going to be assassinated. So he makes
Right.
this really, really weird TV appearance.
Yeah,
Where he asks the Killer Seven to come and find him, in the hopes that they will basically protect him from what is coming. So what did you think of Almeida Land?
It was very weird. I was like so confused.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
this took a very long time for me to do. Because there are multiple parts in it where, like, it's set in this like suburban area, and there was a street, and I could see that the houses in the street had lines leading to them. They had numbers, and on the map you could see that the houses, like, you could go into them. So I spent a very long time running around thinking, how do I get into these houses? Is there a key or something? And it turns out that you need to walk up to the garage and turn into Coyote, and he just automatically jumps onto the garage and through the window. And that's kind of the only use for Coyote that I found, is that just arbitrarily you would have to be Coyote for 2 seconds to go up somewhere. This area is... It's odd because there's a lot of smiles around here. And they constantly respawn. They're like jogging up and down. There's these big wide suburban streets, there's smiles jogging up and down them. And because they're restricted to rails like you are, it is a very good spot for farming. Because you can just switch to Kaide and just snipe them as they round corners, and they just keep coming. I was able to rack up a lot of... this is the first time I realized you could max out the thick blood. Because I was able to, I farmed a whole lot of thick blood, and then I used the machine, and it just said out of order, and I realized, oh, there's a limit. Okay. The other thing that they drop is coins, which no other enemies in any other parts do, and I didn't realize they were doing it until I checked my inventory hours and hours later and realized that I had 120 coins. I didn't know what they did. So the other thing that this area introduces is these absolutely gigantic smiles that are several stories high. And they're like a cyclops. They're these enormous troll monsters with one giant eye in the center of their forehead. And the way that there's two ways of dealing with them, and this is when I started realizing, okay, there are uses for the other persona. Mask's grenade launcher will kill them in one hit because it's so powerful, but you can also hit them just once in the eye with Kaide and they will die. So I kind of dug that because it was giving me there's two ways of dealing with this. It's a risk reward thing. You can do the safe way with Mask, which nets you almost no reward. Or you can do it with Kaide, and you might fuck it up, but the 1/3 of the time it works, you get an enormous reward for it. So I really like that. The purpose of the coins is that there is Almeida, as part of his weird personality cult, has been selling gashapon figures of himself. Which, if you know what gashapon is, it's kind of like Kinder Surprise without the chocolate. It's like a little toy you would get out of a vending machine. So in order to get access to where Almeida is, you need to get all 12 Almeida gashapon figures. And the purpose of the coins is that you put them in a vending machine and you get a random Almeida figure. And it is, from what I can tell, it is actually random. You just have to keep putting coins in the machine until you get the one that you need. I guess, a real gashapon. This works for all of them with the exception of... it's one or two. One of them you need to there's one or two that you can't get from the machine, but the others again, I was kind of amazed that they did this, because you'd think, oh, there's 12 figures, they'll be hidden in 12 different locations. There's actually 3 locations, but one of them has 10 figures in it. So you just keep pumping coins into this thing until you have all the figures, and then you grab the other two. And that gives you access to Almeida's kind of compound thing. The other thing about Almeida Land that I think makes it the most interesting area is that it's a chapter that's all in one place.
Yeah.
The other chapters changed their location. This one doesn't. You're always it does technically change, but you're in visibly the same place. You're just investigating Almeida Land. So you encounter Almeida. He's in a spacesuit, and he talks about how even though he is a cult leader figure, he's presented as though he is doing the right thing. He talks about how he is just trying to heal the world, and he has... The reason he's in a spacesuit is he's deliberately infecting himself with all of these diseases, so that his blood becomes he's filled with the antibodies that will cure them. So he'll be able to heal everyone. Kind of like Bloodborne. He'll be able to heal everyone with his blood. But he has also taken into himself the genetic material that creates Heaven Smiles. and he says to you like, "Okay, I'm turning into a heaven smile." No, he says like, if I turn into a heaven smile, can you kill me?" Yeah, but he doesn't know if he is or not. And then while this is happening, the U.S. government attack Almeida Land, presumably because he has the Yacumo. I think that's what's going on.
Probably, yeah.
They need to get the Yakumo, or else they see it as a source of heaven smiles. So they attack Almeida Land, and they inject Almeida with something. I didn't quite understand what was happening in this scene.
I think it was like a tranquilizer or
Yeah,
something.
they inject him with something, and he transforms into a heaven smile, and he becomes the boss.
Yeah, no, they inject him with something and he's like knocked out, and then they put him in a van and explode the van. And then his head pops off and explodes.
Yeah,
And then his blood is all over the place. And like, if his blood touches someone, they like die.
yeah, he explodes into this huge shower of blood, and
Oh my
then
god, yeah.
from the remnants is like an Almeida smile.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Almeida smile. Again, like this is the boss immediately after a boss that took me 20 minutes, so I was dreading it. But Almeida smile, it went down in like 10 seconds for me, because what happens is his body and his afro become detached. So there is this heaven smile version of Almeida walking around dragging behind him his afro. And he attacks you in this series of vans that are joined together. So it's like a maze. So you can't really get behind him because you're stuck to the
Yeah.
rail. So what you have to do is figure out where he's going to go and just run behind him and shoot his afro. And his afro goes down in, one hit and his afro is gone.
Yeah, it reminded me a bit of the Mikolash fight.
Yeah. Except he only takes one hit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he can't one-shot you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just hit the afro once and the fight was over, and I thought, oh, there's going to be a second phase, and there isn't. It just ends. Yeah. So the following mission is set in it starts off in an amusement park. The idea is that there is an assassin called Curtis who is the former mentor of Dan from Killer 7. And he has set up an amusement park that he is using as a front for trading organs. And specifically, he's looking for the organs of young girls, and he's using them to create heaven smiles. So I really like the start of this part. It's set literally in an amusement park. And that works really, really well with the control scheme, because it is just a series of rides. So you just, like, it's set up like an amusement park. You walk down, and then there'll be like a fork in the road. You can go on this ride or this ride. And as you go through the rides, they're just like a looping thing. You go through them. Hello, Corvo.
It says hello.
So it's broken up into these rides, and it works out like really well with the control scheme, because you have like just a pathway, and then there'll just be a junction, like you can go on this ride or this ride. Each ride is self-contained. You just go into the ride, and it's like a little sort of self-contained area. There usually isn't much of a puzzle. You just sort of run through it, and it does some interesting stuff here. There's because it's an amusement park, there's like some places where there's a children's entrance. So if there's a children's entrance, you have to be con, because he's 14. Otherwise, you can't go in. It also introduces like character upgrades that aren't tied to thick blood. So Mask gets a costume upgrade. Like his mask changes, he gets a more sort of ostentatious look to him. And Dan gets a special new kind of revolver that's called like the Demon Gun or something like that just ups his attack power. It also introduces new smiles. And it introduces a specific new kind of smile that only Mask can kill. And what's notable about this smile is that even though only Mask can kill it, when Mask kills it, like by default, you hit its weak spot, so you always get blood from it. So you can rack up a lot of blood very quickly in this mission just using Mask, because like he's just like wrecking everything, and he's still getting blood for it. There's a specific area that I quite liked here that uses the rails really well, where you're just running around in a circle. It's full of all these doors, and you had to find like the right door to go through. And you could tell because the correct door would they be pictures above the doors, and you would have to figure out which of these doors based on the picture is the one I have to go through. So I thought that worked really well. There's like mazes and things where you have to like. There's a maze where you have to blow open part of the wall. We haven't talked about the rings yet, which are another quote-unquote puzzle that I just found sort of baffling in their implementation. Because you receive these things that are just called the rings. You always get them from a severed head called Susie. She will have them in her mouth. She'll show up and she'll tell you a story and then give you a ring. And
yeah.
the rings they're like fire, water, wind, time, vision, stamina, and power. And all it amounts to is that if you have a specific ring equipped when interacting with something, then it does something. Like, that's all, though. And again, they're so basic that I was sort of left wondering why they were there at all. So, like, one of the attractions that you run into in this amusement park, it's called, like, the Bridge of Hell, and it's just a bridge covered in fire that you can't cross because it's covered in fire. And I guess, like, for myself and most people, your sort of like puzzle brain kicks in. It's like, oh, what do I have to do to get rid of the fire? Do I have to hit a switch? Do I have to bring an item here? No, you just equip the water ring and automatically the fire disappears. And you've had the water ring since like mission 2. You just basically have to remember that you have this thing.
yeah.
And it serves no other function. There's another part where like there's a clock. If you interact with it with the time ring, it does something because it's a clock. And then later on in that mission, there is another point where you have to use the time ring. And again, you just use it. And like that's the only use of the time ring. It just does 2 things. That and like you kind of can't miss it. So I don't know why it is there. There are 2 rings later on called the stamina ring and the power ring. And they're hidden. They're optional, you can miss them. The stamina ring is in Almeida Land, and you get it by kind of abusing the rail system, where you run in one direction, and then instead of continuously running, you turn around and run back, which you wouldn't normally do. But when you run back, you get an alternate junction, and that gives you the stamina ring. The stamina ring doubles your hit points. And then in the second part of the chapter that we're talking about now, if you solve a puzzle moving some cars around, you get a power ring that doubles the amount of damage that your gun does. So those are the only 2 rings that sort of had anything useful associated with them, because it was like a trade-off. You can have speed, you can have stamina or power. And I mean, the correct choice is stamina, because the Heaven Smiles die in 1 hit to their specific little weak point. So doubling your attack power is not that great. So I basically just had the stamina ring on as soon as I got it, and only changed it out for puzzles that are not really puzzles when you stop and think about it. So the amusement park climaxes with a fight against another anime-headed girl who's called Ayame Blackburn. And the bosses up to here have all been gimmick fights that you've had to like just basically do the right thing 1 or 2 times in a row and it's over. The Ayame Blackburn fight is different because she actually has like hit points. What happens is that you fight her in a parking lot, and all she does is laps of the parking lot. And what happens is that every time she stands in the light of one of the lights in the parking lot, she becomes vulnerable and you can shoot her. But because of the way that the controls work, you can't move and shoot at the same time, so you can't really chase her. So what I ended up doing, and I don't know how else you would do this, so this does seem to be the way that they want you to do it, is that I just parked in a corner, aimed my gun at the nearest light, and then just waited for her to go past and shot her once. And I timed this, and it takes her 15 seconds to do one lap of the parking lot. So it was just like 14.5 seconds of nothing, and then you hit fire once. And then wait 14.5 seconds and hit fire again, and that's the whole boss fight. She did hit me, but the damage was negligible. So, like, I don't quite understand what they were going for there, because you can't chase her. So all you do is camp and just like fight. And like, she's on a preset path, and because you're on a preset path, you can't really like avoid being hit. You can't run around her. You just have to sit there and snipe her as she's running past. Yeah, so like it wasn't frustrating, it was just sort of tedious, and I don't know. I feel like they could have just made it like you hit her 3 times and it's over with. But I ended up like having to hit her like maybe like 8 or 9 times before she went down, which is pretty. I just felt like after like the 3rd hit, I'm like, I clearly got this. I don't need to keep doing this. It's like, it's game. I know what I'm doing. Like, it's getting redundant now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So defeating if once you defeat Ayame, she basically just gets in a van and drives off, and you have to follow her. You follow her to the residence of Curtis, who is the guy who is overseeing this organ trafficking thing, and he is the ex-mentor of Dan.
Right, yeah.
Right. This is one of the few areas where Kevin is useful, because Curtis has set up these security beams that if you walk through them, it sets off an alarm. Parts of the level get locked down. You have to go and reset it. But if you're Kevin and you use invisibility, you can just run through them. Again, there's like a lot more sort of random shit with like needing to switch to Coyote for 2 seconds and switch back again. Basically just to remind you he exists. Like, I feel it's like they're so wedded to the idea of there being 7 characters when there's really like maybe 3 that are useful.
Well, Killer 7 sounds a lot more impressive than Killer 3.
I feel like especially Coyote, I found almost entirely useless. Like, there's a specific kind of smile that you have to hit in the side and make it turn around, and it responds to volume of fire. Doesn't respond to actual damage. So, like, Con is useful for those, because he can just put out a whole lot of shots that are very weak, but it doesn't matter. Con was also the one I used to fight Ayame with, because the spray from his gun, like, because it's automatic, I didn't have to be exactly precise with it to hit her as she's running past, because she's very, very fast. So I was able to just aim in the vicinity, start firing a couple of frames before she got there, and the spray would get her. And like, Mask is useful for destroying the somethings only Mask can destroy. He's also good at like if there's a bunch of smiles coming at you, because his grenades have a blast radius to them. But Coyote, I just never found a use for at all. But he's also the one you need to switch to the most, because his 2 talents are he jumps really high and he picks locks. So whenever you get a lock to a padlock or somewhere that you can't reach, you have to switch to Coyote. But like, that's the only time I ever found a function for him. He's really just a worse version of Dan in a lot of ways. So like, this is sort of like, as I was saying, it gives you an excuse to use Kevin, who I never used outside of this. And it starts introducing sort of like, there's an item you can only get by using Dan's charge shot, which I hadn't really encountered before, because usually characters would automatically use like, they just automatically use their ability. There was a place where I couldn't get something, and then it turned out that, because I ended up reading an FAQ because I was stuck here for ages, you had to use Dan's charge shot. And that's, I think, the only instance where Jan's charge shot was used for a puzzle at all. So, I mean, that was kind of interesting. Usually the only character whose gun does anything to the environment is Mask, because he can blow open walls and he can destroy some objects with his grenades. So again, this level is quite long. In contrast to the amusement park one, I started to get a bit tired of this because there's just lots and lots of running around this residence looking for stuff. Lots of stuff you can miss. It was actually quite complex in its design, so there would be places where like you're on the top floor, but you could switch to Con because he was small, and then he would like slip down something and land somewhere else, or like you would be able to use a part where you can go up a chimney. There's the security system stuff is like kind of interesting. You have to be able to turn panels on and off to access different parts. It's very Resident Evil, basically. And there was a part I just couldn't ever do. Yeah. So basically, this is where the game ended for me because I was playing this on an emulator, and it turned out that actually no, hang on, sorry. I'll get to this later on. So the boss of this part again is Ayame again. Thankfully, it's not the parking lot fight. It's a fight where she's in a room with 4 windows. The windows have blinds. It's the same principle as the parking lot, where if a blind goes up, the light comes in, you can see Ayame in the light. So you just had, it was like a shooting gallery. You just have to manage like which of these blinds is open, where I can see Ayame. It goes for not very long. Like she went down pretty quickly because there's only 4 places she can stand. Once you take her down, she is revealed to the enormous anime head comes off, and she's revealed to be a character who you saw in Mission Zero. But there's sort of an issue where like all the women in the game look very, very similar in their design. To the point where like you thought that the decapitated girl in Who Gives You the Rings was the same as another character.
Yeah.
Because they all look like really similar. And like later on there's a woman who is an assassin, and I was thinking like, is she meant to be like this assassin I met before but in disguise or something? Because
Yeah.
they all look so similar. With the exception of Kaide.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would not have known that was the character I'd seen before if it wasn't for the wiki telling me. So this is when my playthrough ended, because I was playing this game on an emulator, and I only had like 2 days to get as far as I could, and I realized after this point that there was something about the ISO I was using that was wrong. There's like a flaw in it, and after you beat Ayame, you have to press a switch, but every time I pressed the switch, the game would freeze. And it didn't matter what settings I was using or like I couldn't alter anything to make it work. It turns out that there's like a flaw in the ISO file. So I could not play beyond this point. The rest of my knowledge of this is drawn from watching a Let's Play on YouTube.
Cool.
Yeah, how was your playthrough?
Well, most of it was watching a playthrough.
Good.
Not
good.
all of it, but most of it.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot less stressful and scary.
Were you scared by it?
Yeah, there were so many moments that are just like, help. Like, there were a lot of startling moments in the game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you make the startled Russian noise?
Yeah, I did, and I was streaming
Yeah.
it too.
Is that still up? Can people still watch that?
Oh, no, it's private now. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All my horrible streams go private, which are all of them.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. So everything from this point onward is from a YouTube video, and I'm sorry. But they're just like, this happened last night. So there wasn't time to like, if we were doing this next week, I would have been able to get like the Steam version or the GameCube version or something and try it that way, but there wasn't time. So sorry.
Yeah, you better be sorry.
This is the hand we've been dealt. Okay, so
Where are we at now? Which mission are we on?
we're at the very end of mission 4.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically I made it about 75% of the way through the game before I couldn't make any more progress. So the final boss of that is Curtis, who is Dan's old mentor. And yeah, basically you that's the boss. It just ends, I think. It has quite a gruesome ending to it where there's a machine that Curtis has been using to extract the organs from the girls he's being sent.
Oh, yeah.
And it ends, and he has their, like, skinned bodies on racks.
Oh my god, yeah.
And it ends with you using that machine on Curtis.
Mm-hmm.
So his intestines and everything are torn out, and his body is hung on a rack somewhere. Do you want to talk about, like, the weird tonal shifts in, like, the material this is dealing with? Because that was coming up when we were talking.
Sure.
Yeah, because we were saying this to each other that, like, it's presented as very, like, sort of, it's incredibly violent, but it's so violent that it's, like, cartoonish. Like,
Yeah.
you shoot the heaven smiles and they explode into just, like, showers and showers of blood. That's, like, shooting out of them like a fountain. It's, like, completely ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, the whole plot with, like, this mysterious, like, the magic document that will allow you to control the world, and the idea of, like, the immortal Kunlan and Harmon trapped in this, like, struggle. And, you know, like Travis with his weird shirts and the decapitated girl speaking to you and everything. That's all in there, but then it will occasionally take these genuinely, like, dark turns out of kind of nowhere. So it will go from, like, it'll go from a weird, like, anime over the top, like, blood splattering thing to just, like, straight up, like, abuse that is not presented as, like, it's just there. Like, and I don't know, again, if that is, if it is supposed to be a juxtaposition, or it's all just meant to be a big joke that you go from, like you have a like a luchador wrestler with a grenade launcher shooting a guy with, like, blades for arms who explodes in a shower of red confetti, to, like, a scene of just elder abuse with, but, like, within the same narrative, and it's extremely jarring. And, like, I don't know to what degree it's supposed to be jarring and to what degree it's all just meant to be, like, fucked up and weird. And I think there was an issue of, like, tonal control that we weren't sure about. Yeah. Like, there's scenes of, like, and allusions to, like, sexual abuse and stuff in it that, like, it just sort of, it stops being weird and just gets, like, just depressing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because, like the Ayame thing, you go from, like, it's a wacky scene of this girl with a giant fake anime head and a machine gun who's, like, running around like a ninja. But then that's followed by just, like, straight up, here's some organ trafficking.
Yeah. Like, here's a dead kid.
Yeah, here's just some mutilated children.
Yeah.
Which is just portrayed as organ trafficking. And it's just a very odd tone to a lot of it. And, like, this is, again, like, this chapter is followed by a chapter that is a Sentai parody. So I think we'll move on to that one.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the following chapter is a Sentai parody. For reference, by Sentai we mean Power Rangers. It's what that genre is called in Japan. The idea is that this is like each one of these chapters is set like they're several years apart. So at this point, the Heaven Smile thing, even though Japan has been destroyed, Heaven Smiles are a problem that the US is still having to deal with. So they make their own Sentai team called the Handsome Men.
Yeah.
So there's it's 8 of them, an 8 member team called the Handsome Men, they're like the Power Rangers, but they do because it's a parody, there's like red and black, then there's also one that's like light brown, and there's one that's like pearl white. It's like coming up with weird colors that you wouldn't normally associate with them. So the premise of this chapter is that the Handsome Men assassinated a US politician. And it turns out that they assassinated him, and then there was a scene of them assassinating him in the official Handsome Men comic that was released beforehand, which led people to believe that the guy who wrote and drew the comic was somehow involved in the assassination because he predicted it. So the Killer Seven are sent to take out the author and artist of the Handsome Men comic. I did not play this chapter because for reasons we already brought up. The revelation is that the guy who is the revelation is that the artist is not actually in control, but he thinks he is. So what happens is he can see the future. And because he sees the future and then he draws it, and because of that he thinks he's actually controlling the future. But he's not. He's just like getting visions of it. And then that's proven to be true because he thinks he's in control of the Handsome Men, but they then just proceed to turn on him. And he's killed by one of them. So I was disappointed I wasn't able to play this because I thought, oh, Killer 7 versus this Sentai team, it's going to be like really weird and interesting. But it plays out as the Killer 7 have to fight the Handsome Men, and it plays out as like one member of Killer 7 versus one member of the Handsome Men. But what happens is that, like, because it's 1 versus 1, but they're all rigged, there is a set outcome. So even though you have, it's a series of duels, but who wins the duel is already decided. You won't know this when you're playing it, I guess, unless you sort of don't do anything. But like, if a character is set to lose, they just do nothing. It's sort of like a Pistols at Dawn thing where it'll count down, and then when it hits 0, you have to attack your opponent. But the ones who are set to lose, they never do anything. And the ones that are set to win, like, they're coded so that if you shoot them, you'll always miss.
Okay.
So I feel a little less bad about not being able to play this now because I know it's rigged and there's no way to win. So you will always ultimately win because it's rigged. And this is where things start getting very meta at the end of this, because Garcian is paired with Handsome Pink. So when Garcian encounters Handsome Pink, instead of them actually fighting, Handsome Pink just reveals who she really is. And she is... This is like, again, what we meant about peripheral characters. This character does make sense, but because she gets like 2 lines and is never seen again, it seems a lot more confusing than it actually is. She is like the agent, I guess, she's connected to the artist and the writer, and she thought that his work was bad. And she reveals to and the idea is that, like, because she is sort of in control of the Handsome Men in real life, and having gotten rid of the shitty artist and writer, she can now kind of control the Handsome Men herself. And then you get this very odd credit scene that plays out like the credits of an arcade game.
Yeah.
Yeah. Complete with, like, presented by Capcom at the end.
Yeah.
And then, and then you see that the person playing the game was Kunlan. So, like, throughout up to this point, you've seen, like, people are constantly having to play games with each other. So you have Kunlan and Harmon playing chess. Then the idea is that they're kind of always in check or always in stalemate, but Harmon has kind of managed to eke out a win so far.
Uh-huh.
There's also a scene in the second mission where there's a group of American politicians and Japanese politicians arguing over a game of mahjong.
Yeah.
And it ends with them accusing each other of cheating.
And then killing each other.
And then they kill each other. And now it turns out that, like, what you just went through is a game being played by Kunlan. And it was rigged. So there's this recurring theme throughout the game of, like, this is all just a series of, contrived conflicts that there is no way out of. And everyone just ends up at a stalemate or killing each other. So the following mission is not technically the last one, but it basically is. Because the one following this is just like one boss fight, then it ends. So this mission is it's basically the giant info dump that explains the plot. So the Killer 7 infiltrate us. It's like it's a school in America. Would you call it an elementary school? It's for like preteens. I don't know what you call those.
What do you mean?
Like, what kind of school would you say it was?
I don't know.
Good. So it's a school for the idea is it's a school for very young children.
Yeah.
And the more that they look into the school, hang on, we better where it actually starts. What happens is that Garcian's usual contact with the US government is assassinated.
Yeah.
And then the woman who assassinated him tells Garcian, like, it's time for you to sort of uncover the truth behind everything. Which results in the Killer 7 going to this school. The school, it's empty, it's abandoned. And the more that they investigate the school, the more that they realize, oh, this school is actually run by the Japanese UN party, even though it's American. And they're sort of running this school secretly, the idea being that the children who go to this school are trained...
Like killers or something?
They're indoctrinated by the UN party to become trained killers and also to kind of embody the values of the UN party. So it will produce children who will later move into positions in the US government, and then they'll do the bidding of the UN party. And then the more they go into it, they realize, oh, the principal of this school was Harmon. And it all starts to get a bit weird. And
yeah,
they discover that Harmon was the principal of this school, and it ends with, again, another boss fight that I don't feel bad about missing because it's rigged. It's a fight where it's the Killer 7 versus it's a guy who he's presented as the Secretary of Education. He's not really the boss. What happens is that he's strung up from the ceiling and you shoot him in the crotch until his lower half explodes and his pants fall down.
Yeah.
But what happens is, like, in doing that, he spawns 7 unique Heaven Smiles. These Heaven Smiles cannot be killed by anything. So there's 1 Heaven Smile for each member of the Killer 7, and they just make a beeline for them and kill them. And there's nothing you can do because you can't hurt them. So they're all gone with the exception of Garcian. Garcian, because the game is like weird and arbitrary, doesn't really explain why, but Garcian is able to use a specific gun that is dropped by the Secretary of Education. And that is able to kill those smiles. So you end up in a situation where all the Killer 7 are gone except Garcian. So that actually does wipe them out. Like, there's no more, like, Dan, Kaide are all just gone from this point. You can't play as them again. So The second part of this plays out in a hotel. Oh, hang on. It's also revealed that the American elections are controlled by the Japanese UN party. And the way they explain this is that because the votes are usually cast at schools, by controlling the schools, they're able to take the votes that were cast at the school and then just report them however they want. So the president of the United States and the politicians there are actually controlled by the Board of Education, who are controlled by the UN party. It's very Metal Gear Solid 2. So the second part of this chapter is Garcian sort of finding out his past. So he travels to a hotel called the Union Hotel, where, and again, this is another thing that, like, oh god, there's a reference to a group of people called the Union 7 who drafted the Yacumo. And then it turns out that the Union 7 were killed, but this is also the same hotel where the Killer 7 were originally killed before being resurrected as Persona. So it's absolutely not clear, and I don't mean this as a complaint. I mean, like, I don't think it's actually supposed to be clear that the Union 7 killing and the Killer 7 killing are sort of intertwined in a way that's, like, kind of almost mystical and never really, it's not actually possible to explain this. And he discovers that so this is where it's revealed, like, the actual relationship between the Killer 7 and Emiya. Okay, so fuck Emiya, right.
Oh, yeah.
Oh god, okay, so up to this point throughout the game, which we haven't mentioned so far, you will find carrier pigeons. And the carrier pigeons all have notes in them addressed to someone called Emiya. It's not made clear who Emiya is until this point. So
Yeah.
there is this figure called Emiya. We don't know who he is, but he's talked to as though he's an assassin and he's part of Killer 7.
Mm-hmm.
So this part of the game does the big story dump in the hotel, and it reveals that Garcian is Emiya. What happened was, Emiya was a student produced by the school that's run by the UN party. And he was trained to be an assassin. So at the age of 13, he went to, as like a child, he went to the hotel where the Killer 7 were, and he killed them all.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually Emiya / Garcian that is the dominant personality that's shifting into them. It's not Harmon. The Harmon that you've been interacting with is actually just a remnant psyche of Harmon within Garcian.
Yeah, that was confusing.
Yeah, the idea, again, this is, again, it's not very well explained. So what happens is, Harmon always had the ability to resurrect the dead. So the Killer 7 were people who had already died. Harmon had brought them back to life. And Harmon also had his remnant psyche ability. So then, when Emiya went to the hotel and assassinated them all, he absorbed the remnant psyches, including Harmon's ability to resurrect the dead. So that's why Garcian can bring them back to life. That's actually, he's channeling Harmon, in a sense.
Uh-huh.
Right. Because this event, like, broke Emiya's brain, Emiya then attempted suicide. It didn't work, but he lost his memory. And he sort of, while he was, like, in this weird state after this attempted suicide and the trauma of killing all the people, he created the Garcian persona.
Uh-huh.
So Garcian's not actually a real person. Garcian is just a sort of Emiya, like a fiction that Emiya created, but he didn't know. And then ends with Garcian. Garcian carries around an enormous case with him at all times. And here you see what's in it, and Garcian opens the case, and it's revealed that it's the weapons of all the Killer Seven. So he had killed them all and taken their weapons, and he had them in this case the whole time.
Uh-huh.
So this basically triggers a breakdown in Garcian, and that is the end of that chapter. It's also, you see more of Harmon and Kunlan playing chess. You see the younger version of Harmon who explains all of this to Garcian. And yes, there's a very, very odd scene in which Harmon and Kunlan are playing chess with each other. Someone breaks the door down and then riddles them all with bullets, and you never see who it is. But it's revealed later on that that was actually the younger version of Harmon. Because the younger version of Harmon has a Tommy gun. He's like an old style gangster. So the young Harmon, who I guess is now a remnant psyche, who is distinct from the Harmon who is playing chess, has killed the Harmon who is playing chess and Kunlan. But because Harmon and Kunlan are immortal, they just come back again anyway. This is, I think, where it starts to get massively confusing. Like, I don't think anything that happened up until this point was that confusing. It was just like a series of people had to be assassinated, and some of them were double agents. This is the point where it starts bringing in all the stuff about, like, Harmon and Kunlan are actually two sort of deity figures who are engaged in this endless game with each other. And they sort of, like, the way that it's talked about is, like, Harmon represents the West and Kunlan represents the East, and they're locked in conflict in the same way that Japan and America are locked in conflict. And, like, they're playing this game, no one can ever win, and everyone in it is just like a playing piece for them. At the end of this chapter, when sort of Garcian breaks down and Emir, like, now that the Killer Seven are gone, Harmon says straight up to Garcian, like, that you've woken up from the nightmare, like, it's over now, like, you're no longer part of this game. And that happens again with a Remnant psyche earlier on, where the woman who assassinates the head of the UN party in the restaurant sequence, you meet her Remnant psyche later on, and she says to you, like, you killed me, but I'm glad you killed me because I'm no longer part of this stupid ongoing game anymore. So the whole idea is, like, this is just going on and on and on forever, and the Killer Seven were just part of it. So this is pretty much the end, except then you get credits and everything, but then there's another chapter at the end. So now we're going to have to go back and explain something that happened in all the other chapters that we didn't mention.
What is it?
Okay. The boss fights are accessed by you using these things called soul shells, which are bullets that you give to... There's a character who's just called, like, the Gatekeeper. And he shows up kind of at random in this... like, you'll just go into a room and it'll turn out that it's the Gatekeeper's room. And it's always the same room. So his room is just sort of like... It just is there. It's never explained. Like, you're just in a building, open the door, it's the Gatekeeper's room. You're in another building, open the door, it's the same room. He's just sort of appears. And you have to give him these soul shells in order to access the boss fights. And when you access the boss fights, you go through the Gatekeeper's room into... It's called the Colosseum. It's just like a big like concrete area with all these doors around it that the boss fights are in. So the idea is that every time you're fighting a boss, you're traveling to this Colosseum, and it's never made clear exactly where it is. Up until the end of the game, where Garcian / Emir physically travels to the Colosseum. He finds it. It's on an island where all of these nuclear weapons were disposed of. That's sort of like off limits. He travels there, he goes into the Colosseum, and prior to that, you have been using the doors that are around the sides of the Colosseum to enter the boss fights. But there's a door in the center that you don't go down. And on this specific instance, Garcian is able to go down that door. And again, sort of playing with time and space, he ends up in his own like trailer that he lives in. It's just sort of like underground. You have to assume that like this doesn't make physical sense at all. Like there's just this place that can be accessed from anywhere, and the bottom of it leads to Garcian's house, which is very clearly not actually underground on an island. It's just a trailer somewhere. I saw someone actually attempting to explain this, and you can't. You just have to assume that there's just like magic shit going on and just roll with it. Yeah. So Garcian reaches the bottom, Emir, because Garcian's no longer a thing, reaches the bottom. He finds the head of the UN party there. And you have a choice here that kind of changes the ending, but not really. And he says, like, I am the head of the UN party. You can kill me or not kill me. If you kill him, then there'll be no more opposition to the United States because the UN party will be gone and the US will take control of the world. But if you let him live, he will continue to manipulate events, and the remnants of Japan, who like survived the destruction of the country, who are now in America, will overtake America. So all that does is change one scene. The ending still plays out the same. So he says, like, look, behind me is the last of the Heaven Smiles. So once you get rid of this guy, the Heaven Smiles are gone forever. So kill him or not kill him, whatever, you go through the door, and you discover that the last of the Heaven Smiles is Iwazaru, the bondage guy who was giving you hints before. And you can't lose this, because he has no means of fighting back because he's like bound. You just shoot him, he dies, and then his face falls off, and it's the face of Kunlan underneath.
Plot twist!
And that's the end. And then there's one more scene that is like, it's a coda, and it's 100 years later. And 100 years later, it is a replay of the end of the first mission, with Kunlan and Harmon facing off against each other. Harmon shoots Kunlan in exactly the same way. Kunlan catches the ball in exactly the same way and lands on the same tower, but 100 years later. And he says, what is this? I wrote down exactly what he says. He says, the world won't change, all it does is turn. So the idea is that this endless, intractable conflict between Kunlan and Harlan will just continue again. Harmon. The intractable conflict between Kunlan and Harmon is just going to keep happening. And this unlocks a new mode called Killer 8, where you can play as the younger version of Harmon. But we won't go into that, I guess.
Maybe another time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It was a cool game. It was just confusing.
Well, I think it becomes confusing toward the end when they start bringing in like multiple versions of events. Well, it's worth pointing out that like it's a series of spy stories, and then the penultimate story is about gerrymandering, and then it becomes all these characters died and came back to life and then died again, and also this event might have happened twice. So I think a lot of the confusion is really just the ending. One character I didn't mention because I didn't notice he existed is that when you meet Harmon, the younger version of Harmon in the hotel, he is seated next to this mysterious figure who never says or does anything. And I looked this guy up, and this is what I mean about the game being confusing. It says his name is Dimitri Nightmare.
Oh yeah, him.
Yeah. This is an exact quote from the wiki. Dimitri's background, origin, personality, and abilities are virtually impossible to define, because he is only mentioned briefly in Hand in Killer 7, meaning the sort of supplementary book, and does not have a single speaking line in the final game. His most intriguing feature is his nickname of Three Eyes, again, a nickname he's not given in the game, which suggests a connection with Emir Parkreiner's third eye, because when Emir is killing people, he grows a third eye.
Uh-huh.
In addition to this, Garcian encounters the echo of Emir on the roof of the Union Hotel just as Harmon encountered Dimitri 2 centuries previously. However, no official connection between the two has ever been made. Similarly, while he shares the same last name as Greg Nightmare, no connection between the two has been established. So the confusion is shit like this, where it's like, here's a character who is on screen for a second with no dialogue, and then it turns out in a supplementary book that they're important. And I think that is, yeah. I can follow the story pretty simply up until that point, at which point it all kind of turns into this. And like the idea of Iwazaru being Kunlan, apparently that is expanded on in Hand and Killer 7. The nurse who alternately looks after and abuses Harmon, she has this massively like detailed story in Hand and Killer 7 that talks about how like she is actually an agent who is hypnotizing him, but that's not in the game at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the confusing shit. But I'd say the story, which is just like three factions fighting over the Yacumo, is like, that made sense. And the repeated idea of like, this is just a game between these two sort of god figures that's just going to go on and on forever, like that all made sense. So it's just the little details, I think, that are confusing. And they're confusing because shit is actually just not in there. It's in something else.
Good job, Richie.
What did you think of Killer 7?
I really liked it. I just thought the entire thing was confusing.
Okay.
I feel like I understand it after this podcast.
I'm glad you do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. This
Yeah.
serves a purpose. It's like we're going back to the roots. Remember when we started talking Bloodborne, and I
Yeah.
would just like listen to it and I'd be like, "Oh, fascinating."
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
and then I'd get crap from people being like, "She adds nothing to the conversation. She just says, "Yes, cool."
Well, you have an excuse because you're hungover.
Also, I tune out when it comes to political stories. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I highly recommend it. 10 out of 10. How much would you give it?
I don't know because like I wasn't able to play the last two missions.
You don't need to play the whole thing to give it a grade, Richie.
Well, now you're adding something.
So now I'm gonna get comments where it's like, she's too quiet, she adds nothing to the conversation, she's useless, Richie, she needs to get on your level. And now I'm gonna get comments that are like, oh my god, you're so loud, you're a loudmouth, stop abusing Richie. God. And it's always me, I have to deal with these comments, not you.
Well,
I need to get credit for that. What?
It's your channel.
We're in it together, Richie, we're a team. Oh, my boyfriend's waving at me. Hi, love. Am I being loud?
No.
No.
She's found her voice.
I found my voice. Yeah.
Yeah. I would recommend playing this. I did have some reservations, like I said, about like the game seems set up to be like Virtua Cop on a rail. But then there's a lot of backwards and forwards later on, and sort of some kind of. I think the more open-ended the maps get, the sort of the less focus it. The less focused the maps get, the more the controls feel like a limitation. Like the amusement park chapter is a really good example because the first half of that in the amusement park works extremely well because it is just a series of self-contained like attractions that you go to. There's just like a fork in the road. You go to one, you do it, you come out, you go to the next one. That's followed by the Curtis's residence, which you have to keep going back and forth in. And there's all these different areas, like a garden and a pool and like a garage. You have to go back and forth constantly, and the way that you do that, I think, doesn't work quite as well because those controls with being stuck to rails and everything don't really lend themselves to, like, it just feels annoying having to go back and forth like that. Oh, and the first day army fight is terrible. Also, the way that, like, there are a lot of smiles later on. Every single time you encounter smiles, you have to stop moving to get rid of them. And because you are restricted to the rail, you cannot run around them. Like, if one is coming for you and you keep running, you are going to run into it unless you stop and then shoot it. And in some of the later chapters where there are smiles everywhere, it becomes kind of tedious to deal with them. Like, every time you go into a room, there's more smiles. Like, if you're, like I was saying with the Curtis residence, a lot of that is about going backwards and forwards. And it gets kind of tedious having to go back and forth like 3 or 4 times across the same room, when every time you do it, you have to go and get rid of the smiles first. So I feel like more just self-contained little chunks of it that you did once would have benefited it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a very, very unique and interesting game. I would recommend everyone play it. It is on Steam now, or you can steal it like I did, but...
Yeah, I actually bought it on Steam.
Well, if you pirate it, the ISO won't work. So I was hoist by my own petard. Did it make you... Okay,
Well,
Suda51
yeah.
made a bunch of games after this that are kind of like aesthetically as strange, but are more conventional.
Uh-huh.
Like No More Heroes is a much more sort of straightforward action game, but
Oh, I heard about that one.
it maintains the weirdness and like the look of it, and it had the same sort of like weird plot and everything. I don't know if you're interested in that. Kind of with a more the other thing is like constantly having to change which character you are. Again, like I said this before, it felt a lot like there was really 3 characters and then 4 guys I had to switch to do random shit. And I think that's exacerbated by the way that you upgrade individual characters. Because at the start of the game, you're gonna have to ration the upgrade serum a lot. So, like, I ended up just putting it all in Dan, which meant every time I upgraded Dan, I wanted to use everyone else even less, because
Yeah.
now Dan is stronger than everyone else. But that did plateau after a while because the last couple of sets of upgrades require so much serum that you're gonna start using your serum to upgrade other characters as well. So like I ended with like Dan was like they can go up to 5. Dan was like 4s and 5s and everything. Kaide was like 4s and 5s and everything. But Kevin was nothing. Coyote was nothing. Like Con was like 2s and 3s. Mask was like 3s and 4s. I also learned while I was researching this that in earlier versions of the game, you couldn't change character from the menu. You had to go back to a save room to do it. And if you had to do that, I wouldn't have been able to finish playing it. It would have just been so fucking tedious.
Yeah.
Like, it is literally like you will just come to a barrier, and then Travis will be there, and he'll just go, and the subtitle will be something like, "Oh, a professional wrestler could break this," meaning switch to mask.
Yeah.
And like it's annoying enough that happens, but if that had happened and every time it happened you had to run back to a save room, I would have just given up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Richie.
Okay.
Do the outro.
That was... what episode was that? What podcast is this?
This is Gaming in the Yeltsin Years.
That was Gaming in the Yeltsin Years episode... in which we covered Killer 7, a game neither of us played in the Yeltsin Years. What episode was that? Like 4?
Okay, let's think about this. We did...
There was episode 0.
Yeah.
There was...
We did,
the one with
Mega
Aegon.
Man?
Yeah, we did Mega Man
first, no?
We did Final Fantasy X with Sana. We did Mega Man with Nick. We did Super Metroid with Aegon.
Okay.
So this would be 4.
I think so.
Which we did with Rachel and Spirit.
Yes! Thank you, Rachel. This was a wonderful suggestion.
Yeah, it's I'm glad that I finally got around to playing this, because I knew it existed, but I had not played it before.
Yeah, and I'm glad I could help you understand it.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I see the hangover's clearing up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like the angry you get, it's like dislodging parts of alcohol from your brain.
Alright, I guess that's it.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.